Galliano.
John Galliano.
Galliano.
John Galliano. Galliano.
John Galliano.
Galliano.
Mr. Galliano.
Galliano.
John Galliano.
Galliano. John Galliano.
Galliano. John Galliano.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you'll bear with me.
It took a couple of hundred years of world domination by the British Empire to produce a museum like this. The romance of history lives within the walls of the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. It might have been 20 years ago that John Galliano first walked through these doors as a fashion student in search of inspiration for his designs. So in a sense, he was already walking into history. But even he, with all his vision and self-belief, could have had little idea that 2 decades later he'd be as world famous as any of his fashion idols.
In a career that is a testament to the irresistible allure of beauty, John Galliano has proved over and over again how much more there is to fashion than mere clothes. His sensibility combines a reverence for the past with a passion that seems to spring naturally from his Spanish roots, and a sense of theatre that was sharpened by his English upbringing.
I was born in Gibraltar, and I lived there till I was 6. So that whole Latin thing was, I think, one of the biggest influences on me. The colour, the light. Also, the frontiers were closed, so to go to school, if I went to Spain, I'd have to go via Tangier, so you can imagine what an adventure that was for a kid.
Do you think it was rather cruel then that you ended up in England? You'd had this very sort of colourful, rich childhood, and you ended up in an environment that didn't really understand that at all.
I didn't think it was cruel at the time. I think part of it was quite exciting, this adventure going with your mother and your sisters to London. It was quite exciting. But yeah, I mean, the difference, just the light, it was very grey, the whole different culture. However, my mother did do her best to bring that with her, that whole Latin thing.
Initially, young Galliano's interests were a far cry away from beautifully constructed clothes.
I wasn't into fashion when I was young at all. I didn't know what it was. My love of design came through fashion illustration. That's really where I fell in love with and discovered design. So I applied for a 1-year foundation course at St. Martin's, and that was great because you tried a bit of everything, painting, sculpture, film. So that you had to kind of loosen up and really decide what you wanted to do in the next 3 or 4 years. I opted for the 4-year.
John, when he was at St. Martin's, was an extraordinary waif-like figure. Like virtually all students at St. Martin's, he was starving. He had no money, no grant or anything. He would disappear for quite long periods, and we didn't know what he was doing. And he didn't think it was part of his job to tell us. He was, in fact, researching in the V&A, the Victoria and Albert Museum.
He was great. He was very fresh, knew an awful lot about that which he wanted to see in the collections. I mean, on many occasions he taught us about cut and construction. And you know that here's a person who's going to look at the past but not slavishly copy in any way, shape or form. And it's going to come out completely differently and totally new. And it's very inspiring.
Here was someone who would never compromise. He would never go into the rag trade end of fashion. He wanted to be a great designer, and he would starve if necessary, but he'd get there, or he'd die and try.
Besides studying, John also had a part-time job in theatre to make ends meet.
It's a whole world under there. It's quite fab. Hearing what's going on, and then a trapdoor opens, and you got to do your moments of work, and it's great. It's really exciting.
Are they points that kind of rolled on into the way you approach your own fashion later on?
Yeah. It did appear in my work. I felt it was valid, it was rich, it was a backdrop. It brought another dimension to the clothes.
The trends of the times and his experience of the theatre exploded in John's first sensationally acclaimed collection.
At that time, when I graduated and I was inspired by Les Merveilleuses and Les Incroyables, there was models like Leslie Weiner bleaching the hair. It was very garçon, the whole thing was a very kind of masculine look. Armani was putting women in men's suits. That's the vibe that was going on. And out came these kind of revolutionary figures, boys and girls dressed, you know, they could wear each other's clothes, coats that could be worn upside down, inside out, skirts on boys. It made a bit of a statement at that time.
This kind of set the pace, didn't it, for a while for you, that you had this incredible profile, but you were absolutely broke.
Oh, yeah.
And that went on for...
Till yesterday.
It's impossible to overestimate the creative ferment of London in the early 1980s. Necessity is always the mother of invention, and punk had already taught kids that if they wanted something done, they'd better do it themselves. So, with more creativity than cash, they were turning their dreams and nightmares into clothes, music, magazines. Life was one long, swell party.
Did I go out?
Did you go out and spend all your money on nightclubs?
I didn't need to spend money. Clubs were fun and we were invited.
Was a punk sensibility at all important to what you were doing?
Yeah, it was. I mean, there was great things going on. I mean, the spotlight was on London at that point. You know how it goes in cycles. It was definitely on London at that point.
London's reputation for the wild, the wacky and the decadent derailed a number of promising careers. It quickly became obvious that mere creativity wasn't enough. A bigger picture was needed. When I first interviewed John Galliano 10 years ago, it was clear that he was wrestling with these realities, but it was equally clear that his vision was already pretty intact.
This sort of anatomically inspired knitwear. I'm very interested.
Is showing in Paris part of marketing yourself to the world?
After that whole scene of London, the sort of spotlight went off it, and suddenly I realised I really enjoyed what I was doing, and I wanted to be international. It was a commercial decision to show in Paris, so it just made logical sense to go and show there.
Once upon a time, it was considered an all but essential part of the creative process that artists starved for their art. It's a romantic notion for sure, but that only makes it perfectly appropriate for John Galliano. His move to Paris signaled the start of a very trying time in his life, when he was entirely dependent on the generosity of others.
I definitely decided to get really serious. So it was a real adventure. I mean, we came here with like 10 francs in our pocket. And I had a friend who worked here, Faisal Amour, and he said, yeah, you're doing the right thing, come over, you can camp in my studio until you find your feet, kind of thing, you know. So I worked within his structure, and then it was like one house with two heads. Something had to go. So I did. Then at that point I was really kind of on my own in Paris.
A buzz swelled around Galliano and his right-hand man, Stephen Robinson, and left-hand woman, Amanda Harlick, as they were putting on their original shows in Paris. There were important eyes watching their progress.
Around 10:30 at night, I went up into the workspace that they had been given. It was a garret. It was just, you know, a little hot plate. They were warming up beans from a can. Old McDonald's, you know, Big Macs were dried up on the side. And there on this stock man was a toile for one of those big crinoline dresses. And I didn't even see it as a finished garment. It was just the beginnings of the toile and the fabric next to it. And I just knew that this was going to be a very important moment in fashion.
Was there at that point a feeling that something was coming? There was a momentum and something had to give?
Yeah, there was a feeling that something was coming, and there was a lot of interest in Galliano, because these fantastic ladies were coming to order Galliano frocks we had never heard of before. Haute couture ladies, you know, serious buyers. We were merrily, you know, producing the clothes and getting on with it as best we could, but our clientele was growing and growing, which was really exciting.
Paris brought a new level of professionalism to Galliano's craft, but in return he brought a new kind of excitement to the city.